Issues of Faith.
Hello everyone, welcome to Issues of Faith. Great show today. We are talking about the future of faith and the growing number of people who say they are spiritual but not religious. And we have with us to talk about that Clay Stauffer, Reverend Clay Stauffer with Woodmont Christian Church in Green Hills in Nashville. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You've written an article in the Tennessean about this. I found it fascinating. And I want to start with just kind of the overview, what I said. More and more people are saying, yeah, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Why do you think we're seeing that?
Well, that's the catchphrase, and pastors hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. I think that people understand the importance of spiritual growth in their lives, but they are wary of institutionalized religion, structured religion. And I think we live in a culture now where people are not just going to go to church because that's just what you do. Now, you could argue that Nashville is still different from a lot of other parts of the country. We're in the Bible Belt. We still have a lot of people that are, quote, churchgoers, but people are looking to grow in their spiritual lives. And so when somebody says, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, I've always said, I don't know how you can be religious without being spiritual.
And is that maybe a way of saying on Sundays there are so many things that compete for people's time? And often it's just family time. You have two people working, you have kids, they just want to spend time with their family. So by saying I'm spiritual, it means, well, I can get what I need by going to the park with my family, as opposed to going inside the walls of a church and worshiping.
Well, and that is the criticism. Many people are old enough to remember blue laws, where basically everything was blocked off on Sunday. I mean, church, Sabbath, and family time was the only option. Well, now, you've got Titans games, you've got kids sports, you've got business meetings, so church is just another option of many. And the criticism that people will say is, well, if you're spiritual but not religious, that just means you don't want to be accountable. You don't want to show up. You don't want to commit to a community. You just want to, you just want to be. And there's some validity to that. But make no mistake, any minister would tell you that the church now has to compete with many other things on a Sunday morning. And
there's some stereotypes that are associated with church, right? What are some of the stereotypes that you're hearing and that are out there now?
Well, Diana Butler Bass wrote a book called Christianity After Religion, and what she did was she used a word association where she said, okay, when you think of religion, what do you think about? And people said, I think of dogma, I think of rules, I think of creeds, I think of structures, I think of buildings, I think of institutions. She said, when you say the word spirituality, what do you think about? And they said, well, I think of spiritual growth, I think of 12 steps, I think of authenticity, experiencing the divine. Which of those two things is going to be more appealing?
Certainly. The spirituality sounds more appealing.
Right. But unfortunately, I think people have been quick to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They take all the things, all the problems that they have with organized religion, and they forget that there is a spiritual side to being a part of the church. And people are not going to stay involved in a church if they're not growing in their spiritual lives. I mean, that is absolutely essential. And so you'll find that folks won't stick around if they feel like their spiritual life has become stagnant.
So how do churches today respond to that? What do they need to be doing? As you said, the blue laws in the 50s, you built a church and people just walked in.
Right.
That's not the case now.
When the builder generation came back from the war, World War II, and they started building all the institutions and the churches, many of the mainline Protestant church buildings that we see today, you would open the doors and people would come. That's just what you did. So you're right. They don't just come just because that's what you're supposed to do. Something else that's really interesting is that statistics now show that it used to be if you were a regular churchgoer, you would go to church 3 out of 4 Sundays a month. You might be out of town, you might have a sick child, but 3 out of 4 Sundays was right. Now, research shows that if people come once a month, and some people even say once out of every 6 weeks, they consider themselves to be regular churchgoers. And that's not a judgment, that's just an observation. Of course, as a pastor, I don't like to hear that, right, but that's what the research is telling us now.
And I want to get to how churches respond to that, but also in this article you talked about, I guess, 3 phases, 3 ages of Christianity. And that is kind of a telling sort of thing. So let's kind of go through those. What are the three ages? This was from a book titled The Future of Faith by Harvard theologian Harvey Cox.
Yeah, Harvey Cox has been a trend spotter in religion for many, many years. He published a book back in 1965 called The Secular City that kind of put him on the map. And in the book that he wrote to coincide with his retirement back in 2009 is called The Future of Faith. And what he does is he breaks the history of Christianity down into three basic eras. The first era he calls the Age of Faith, and this was from the time of Jesus Christ up until the rule of the Emperor Constantine. And during the Age of Faith, he says that people were more concerned about following Jesus and living out his teachings and just being his disciple. Then he says in the middle of the 4th century, when Constantine comes to power and gets converted to Christianity, that he makes that the official religion of the Roman Empire. And according to Cox, that was a travesty, because Christianity was always a religion that would challenge the powers that be and challenge the faith. And now all of a sudden it is married to the structure that it used to hold in check. Now the flip side of that is, I do wonder if Christianity would have spread as drastically as it did had Constantine not converted. But what got lost in that conversion was the ability to say, is that the kingdom of this world, or is that the kingdom of God? And he calls that age, starting in the middle of the 4th century, the age of belief. And during the age of belief, he says that we became much more interested in creeds and doctrine. You had all of the councils and all of the gatherings together and say, what is orthodox religion? What do you have to believe to be a real Christian? And Cox says that age went from Constantine's conversion all the way up until the middle of the 20th century.
So just a few years ago, we have just recently exited that age.
55 years ago, he says, we changed from the age of belief into what he calls the age of the Spirit. And what he says about the age of the Spirit is that people are not as impressed or into dogma and a core set of beliefs. What they want is to experience the divine. They want to grow spiritually in their lives. So what good is it if you can recite the Apostles' Creed, or you can rattle off a bunch of different scriptures, but it doesn't have any impact on your life? It doesn't change you each and every day. And so that's what he says, that in the middle of the 20th century, we began to move into the age of the Spirit. And church-going trends started to reflect that, because that's when church-going began to wane in America, especially in the mainline Protestant churches.
And there was that period from Constantine up until about 60 years ago where religion and the establishment became so intertwined. Right. And I think that's an interesting point. Initially, it was a radical sort of set of beliefs, and it challenged the establishment. Mm-hmm. And then for centuries, it was kind of associated with the establishment, and that was maybe not a comfortable place for it to be. Well,
and a lot of the message was lost because it was married to power. And so if Christianity is an alternative to the way of the world, if the kingdom of God is different from the kingdom of the world, well, if all of a sudden those two get combined, you can see how it would be hard to differentiate between, well, what is the kingdom of this world and what is the kingdom of God? And interestingly enough, Constantine actually used the faith. His conversion happened, I believe, on the battlefield, where a sun was shining on the sword, and he saw the cross, and it said, "Conquer in the name of Christ." Well, what a paradox that is, because Jesus was a peaceful person. He taught peace. He advocated peace. He said, turn the other cheek, love your enemies. And so now you've got people conquering in the name of Christ. And that's a perfect example of what Cox is talking about, the change and the shift that he says was unfortunate for the Christian faith. So now that we're in, according to Cox, the age of spirituality, and we've been there for the last 60 years or so, how do we respond? How do churches respond? Mainline denomination, all types of churches. What does that mean? Well, I think that we have to stop separating spirituality from religion. I think they are intertwined. They are, you cannot, like I said, you cannot be a religious person and not grow spiritually. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, it's like saying, well, when people say, what does it mean to grow spiritually? I go back to what Paul says in Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We have to ask ourselves, are we cultivating these virtues in our lives? And if not, why not? And it's been true that in many churches, a lot of people don't behave according to those virtues, and that's a problem because people see that as being very hypocritical. They say, well, you say you believe this, you say that you follow Jesus, but this is how I see you acting. And so the younger generations have called that out and said, you know, I see a disconnect between the person that you claim to follow and the way that you operate.
It seems like one of the big things would be mission. You know, it would be going out, maybe locally, maybe internationally, whatever the case may be, but going out and getting your hands dirty and doing something other than sitting within the walls of a building. And then when you're within the walls of a building, it's all the maintenance of the building. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with a building.
Right, right. The missional church, I did my master's degree at Princeton Seminary. A guy named Daryl Guter and some others were talking about the missional church back in the 90s. And the whole concept of the missional church was basically a response to this shift from the age of belief to the age of spirit. And they said no longer can the church just sit back and expect people to come to them, but the church must go out into the community and be the church in the world. You know, a lot of people think of the church as just being a building that sits on the road. I mean, I pastor a beautiful church right there on Hillsborough Road in the heart of Green Hills, and people love to look at it. But the church is not the building. The church is people, and you're absolutely right that mission and outreach and going out and getting your hands dirty and getting involved in different ministries is what feeds spiritual vitality and what really helps people feel like they're putting their faith to work.
Well, we've talked about the evolution kind of up to now. We're going to take a break. Then I want to talk about where we're going to be 60 years from now, 100 years from now. Take a break. Be back right after this.